Hi, I'm Kamon Reynolds, and in this video we're going to address pollen sub and some of the issues that you can have with it, should you feed it, when you should feed it, and what type of recipes you probably should not engage in. So, oh, get out of there. I tell you, cats love this stuff as well. So we're in January. It's been a very mild January. This time last year we were in the single digits at night, and you know, it's just one of those things. Weather's different every year. Get out of here. That's going to give you a tummy ache. And so anyways, there was some information I saw the other night. A beekeeper posted info about a cheap recipe for making your own pollen sub. And it was terrible. I'm not going to name names, but it was a YouTuber who's pretty famous, who just cares about getting information that'll suck you in to get more views. And hey, all YouTubers are trying to get views and stuff like that. However, we want to do it in a way that's going to help inform you on how to keep your bees healthy and alive, and how to keep your cats from getting tummy aches. So the recipe was wheat, it was condensed milk, it was the wrong type of yeast for like baking bread with, and then it was some cornmeal. And you know what? The bees will work that this time in the winter when there's nothing else coming in on a warm day, because the bees are, I just got pooped on by a bee, amazing. The bees are desperate, and they're hard workers. They're going to go out there and they're going to gather nectar. They're going to go gather pollen, and if they can't get those things, then they're going to go get honeydew from aphids, or they're going to go get tree sap, or they're going to get chicken feed. They're going to get whatever they can get, bird seed dust, and most of that is not usable for them, and what they can use oftentimes can be very dangerous for them going through winter. Here in places like Tennessee where it's mild, it's not such a big deal because our bees get out all the time during winter and can take a cleansing flight. But if you're feeding a bad recipe like I just talked about, or if the bees have access to some stuff, and it's whether you gave it to them or maybe sometimes nature gives it to them, and there's a lot of roughage in the material, it can cause a lot of gut problems going through winter. And we definitely don't want that. You have to be careful with these recipes, and sometimes I understand we all want to save money, but there are some things you don't want to cut corners on, and when it comes to feeding bees, that is one of them. Now, some of you are like, well, I'm just not going to feed the bees and don't have to worry about it. Well, that can also cost you money as well. Young colonies need feed, and sometimes we have bad years. You get a bad fall flow and there's no good nutrition coming in, or very little. A pollen sub might be the difference between your colony going into winter with 3 frames of bees or going into winter with 8 to 10 frames of a cluster of bees, and they're going to be so much stronger and so much more resilient, especially in those extreme cold areas where a big cluster, I think, can be helpful. Now, you can get by with smaller clusters, but I want to talk about our pollen sub over here and when you should start feeding it. So again, we're in January. I really like to time my feeding around when nature starts supplying its own pollen. Now, they call this stuff pollen substitute, but that is very inaccurate. It's a supplement. Whenever there's a good amount of well-balanced protein coming into the hive, they really ignore this stuff, and sometimes it completely ignore it and just will kick it out of the hive. So one thing we want to do is realize that this is not a replacement. This is a supplement. Now, I found when there's only a trickle of pollen coming in, or there's poor quality pollens coming in, the bees will take your pollen sub. And here we have a bucket of it right here. And it is really cold because I leave it out in the winter. We make it up. And this is just 3 ingredients. It's Ultra Bee, it's Pro Sweet, and it is a little bit of granulated sugar. That's all it is. I really like this recipe. I have another one that's cheaper to make if you don't have access to a Pro Sweet or a similar type of syrup for bees. And I'm going to leave those in the link below. Now, I like to wrap that in parchment paper, but when am I going to start feeding that? Well, the maples are probably going to start blooming here because of the mild weather we've been having in the next couple of weeks. I usually like to time it about right the time when they start, or right before, and then you want to, if you're going to feed pollen substitute, then you're going to want to feed it consistently. Are we trying to replace the other natural stuff? No, it's not going to. The bees are still going to bring that in. They're still going to use it. But what happens is, let's say you get a good pollen flow off the maples, and then you're waiting, like we are, for other things like henbit and dead nettle, but you have a really long cold snap. It happens. your bees are going to start brooding a little bit off of that natural pollen coming in, but then they're going to, if they don't have enough stored up, they're going to go backwards over those cold weeks because nothing's coming in, or maybe something gets bit by a really hard freeze, whatever it is. Putting that pollen sub in there is going to smooth things out to where the bees constantly have a protein source. Is it as ideal as the natural stuff? No. But it can really help, especially when you're going for raising more bees or producing more honey. It really helps just smooth things out along the ride to spring. And some years it doesn't help out a ton. Some years it makes a huge difference. And so many beekeepers like myself go ahead and feed it during those early critical months coming out of winter. And if you're way up north, this might be towards spring for you. So you'll have to pay attention to your season. But I really like timing to do it around the earliest pollen. Some people like to feed earlier than I do. I don't. I really like timing it towards when nature's kind of doing its thing. I'm just trying to help smooth out any road bumps that the bees and nature hit along the way. So that's where this pollen sub comes into. Now, one thing to watch out for is small hive beetles. Here in Tennessee, we have them. I know beekeepers and professionals and scientists, and there are so many different opinions on feeding supplement out there. All I can tell you that for me, this stuff works very, very well. It doesn't work as good as a natural flow, but when your bees need protein and you have nothing natural to give them, this stuff makes a big difference. And there are beekeepers in this state, and some of them are more than beekeepers, they're state authorities, that will tell you that you should never feed a pollen sub. I totally disagree with that. I listened to that information for a while, and I found out that nature throws you some curveballs. This fall we had a terrible dry period, and we didn't produce very good pollen. Throwing a little bit of this sub in there with it made all the difference in the world. Again, the recipes for these things are going to be in the links below. But just with the small hive beetles, what you have to do is if you have a 10-frame colony that's really strong and growing, they're going to eat that. Bees eat a lot very quickly when they're healthy. If your bees are not eating the pollen sub, there's a couple things going on. Either one, they don't need it because there's so much abundant pollen coming in. This happens a lot in spring and early summer, depending on your season. But if you have a lot of diverse, healthy pollens coming in, they're not going to fool with this substitute or supplement or whatever you want to call it. But if they are eating it, they're getting something from it. Now, if they're not consuming it and there's not a lot of natural stuff coming in, there's something wrong with the colony. And professional beekeepers for a long time have been able to go to colonies, and this is one thing we look for. If we're in a time period where we're needing to feed bees and we see, oh, they're not drinking their syrup down, or oh, they're not eating their patty like the rest of the colonies are, that usually means there's something going on with the colony. Sometimes it's bad. Sometimes they're just going through a transition. I've noticed several times when they're going through a requeening process, they slow down on their consumption, and that's probably due to the lack of brood. Obviously, if you have a lot of brood in the colony and there's a lot of eggs being laid, the bees are going to need a lot of protein coming in to make sure that they're able to feed them as much as possible. Also, one thing to consider is the fact that when bees have to hold back on giving the brood worker jelly, which is similar to royal jelly, when they can't give them as much, those bees are going to be shorter lived. Now, ideally, you're going to have enough stuff coming in from nature, so you're going to have the longest lived bees. But during those time periods where you don't, where you have a young colony, giving them a supplement like this is going to prolong their life. Is it going to be as long as the natural stuff? No. But if you don't have the natural stuff, then you really need something like this, because if they run out of protein entirely, they will cannibalize the larvae, and then they're going to go backwards. And not only are they going to go backwards in population, the varroa mite population is going up. The viruses that they introduce into the bee system and the bacteria are going to be able to have their way more readily. I have noticed, and a lot of other beekeepers have, and there's some scientific data out there, but there's still so much research to be done. But when your bees are being fed on by the mites, and you're having all this, the viruses injected, and your nutrition levels are low, it takes the mites to do more damage, in my opinion, at a lower population when the bees are going through a nutritional stress time period of the year. And for us, summer is a rough period here because there's not a lot of nutrition. Mite levels have been going up since about late January or late February. And if you haven't taken care of those mites, the bees don't have a ton of bee bread left over, which the big ones usually do, but your young colonies will not, then you have collapses in August and October and September. And that period right there is where I think most beekeepers lose their bees. And even if they don't lose them during that time period, they lose them in the winter because of what they did not do or what the bees did not have in those months. So with small hive beetles, don't give too much at a time. I usually find that a large double deep colony that is packed and that needs protein, they can consume 1.5 to 2 pounds in a week or less. And yes, sometimes you'll get a little bit of small hive beetle larvae in there, but if you're putting some traps in, which I'm going to put some links below on that as well. There's a couple different traps out there. Some of them are cheap, some of them are more expensive, but they all work, and you can check those out and keep the small hive beetle population low. That's one of the tricks, is constantly fighting those beetles, keeping the population low. That makes it easier for your bees to be able to get to the patty before they do. And yes, you're going to have a couple issues with small hive beetle every now and then, but if you have 15 or 20 larvae in there and it's a healthy colony, it's not going to make a difference. Some people think a couple beetles are going to be able to sack a colony. I've seen healthy colonies with 50, 80, 100 beetles in them. Now, we want to get some traps in there and kill those things, because it's going to make it easier on our bees to consume the patty without it getting all messed up. But ideally, you've got to give them what they need. So if you have a 5-frame nuke, we're probably looking at like a 1/4 pound max. If, double deep, that's in the middle of our summer dearth period, I can do 1.5 to 2 pounds a week, no problem. Sandwich it in between, smoke the bees away from it so you don't crush any bees. Put it in between, the bees can eat it from above and below. Also, we have our videos on the feeder rims. You can put it above if you're running singles where you just want to feed above. And giving the bees more access on the top of the patty and the sides is going to make it to where they can consume it quicker. But there are several things that you have to watch out for. Do you need to feed pollen sub in spring? Nah, you don't have to. I think it can definitely help your bees out though. I've used it on the colonies before, and it's really made a difference. I've used it on, I've not used it before, and I've had colonies do very well. A lot depends on how good your fall was, how much bee bread they were able to go into winter with, how much nature is providing pre-spring and able to get your bees built up, and a few other factors. But I usually find just a little bit of supplement during that period to help smooth out from one maple pollen to the dandelion to the henbit, or in case one of those happens to fail that year, we still have that smooth level of protein coming out so those bees don't cannibalize that brood. The queens continue laying, and the colony keeps going forward to it. Now when you have your honey flow hitting, you have a large population of not just bees in the hive, you have a large population of forager bees, so you get that early nectar. A lot of beekeepers miss this, and if you miss just a week or two of prime nectar season, we could be talking gallons of honey. Here in Tennessee, short, strong flows. You get it while the getting is good, or you wait till next season, so you have to have a strong population of bees. And this stuff is not going to contaminate your honey. We don't feed this during our honey flow. We feed it long before our honey flow starts. And in this way, it helps stimulate them. So there's variables out there. Don't go cheap though. You can make your own recipes, but there's also been a lot of issues with beekeepers getting the wrong material in their feed, or they don't have tryptophan or zinc or one of the essential amino acids, and because of that, the bees won't build off of it. And yeah, you got it for half the price, but you're getting less than half the brood production. So I really like Ultra Bee. Mega Bees worked good. AP23. There's a lot of different patties out there. It doesn't take much. But anyways, if you enjoy our videos, thanks for watching. Check those links out on the pollen patty recipes. And if you like them, share and subscribe.